Welcome to the Homesteaders of America podcast, where we encourage simple living, hard work, natural healthcare, real food, and building an agrarian society. If you're pioneering your way through modern noise and conveniences, and you're an advocate for living a more sustainable and quiet life, this podcast is for you. Welcome to this week's podcast. I'm your host, Amy Fewell, and I'm the founder of the Homesteaders of America organization and annual events. If you're not familiar with us, we are a resource for homesteading education and online support, and we even host a couple of in-person events each year, with our biggest annual event happening right outside the nation's capital here in Virginia every October. Check us out online at homesteadersofamerica.com. Follow us on all of our social media platforms and subscribe to our newsletter so that you can be the first to know about all things HOA. That's short for Homesteaders of America. Don't forget that we have an online membership that gives you access to thousands, yes, literally thousands of hours worth of information and videos. It also gets you discount codes, an HOA decal sticker when you sign up, and access to event tickets before anyone else. All right, let's dive into this week's episode. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Homesteaders of America podcast. I'm really excited to have Pastor Mike Signorelli with us this week. He's probably a very controversial person online, but he is also one of my favorites. My husband and I love watching Mike. We have an interesting story on how we kind of got connected. So welcome to the podcast, Mike. We're happy to have you here.
It's such an honor to be here. We're going to have a great conversation.
Oh, we are. So I want to preface this with our audience. I know our podcast audience is like different religions and different cultures, but we preach Christ here. And so you guys know that, you're used to that. And so I am kind of thinking Mike and I might get into some really deep stuff today. And I want everyone to keep listening because it doesn't matter what your background is. I think you're going to gain some really good, solid theology and information from today's podcast. So, Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, well, listen, I know that you have a diverse audience. So let me just say there's a season of my life where I was an atheist. I've actually read the Hindu Vedas. I read the Quran. I read the Bible several times through, cover to cover. And, I just went on a very intense journey to what do I believe? What do I actually believe? And so that really is a big part of my identity. I'm curious. So I want to encourage everybody, stay curious. I like to dabble in a little bit of everything. So, I was raised though in a home. My mother was a victim of domestic violence. She got married multiple times to essentially what became abusive stepdads. But then in the midst of all that, she saw a newspaper article that was a local pastor asking for a worship leader. And my mom, she's from West Virginia. So she played like this honky tonk, kind of like Loretta Lynn style music. So she hit this pastor up and she called the classified ad and said, hey, I could be your worship leader. The only problem is I'm not saved. I'm not a Christian. And so this pastor actually said, I'm going to bring my wife over and we're going to lead you to Christ. And so anyways, he literally came over to our trailer. We had a trailer at the time. Shout out to all my trailer park family listening right now. And he led my mom to Christ. She had a conversion experience. And for me, that was the first time I ever saw my mom happy, like real joy. Mm-hmm. But for me, because I have more of an intellectual bend, it can't be my mom's thing. I got to know it for myself. Right. So really for me, from my teen years all the way through my 20s was a really intense, what do I believe? And all these years later, hopefully this doesn't turn anybody off from listening to the rest of this, but I live in New York City and I pastor a 6-location national church that's filled with former Muslims and Hindus and atheists and agnostics and business professionals, entrepreneurs. I mean, we have such an eclectic church and we're all just journeying through life together.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on because you do have such a diverse background. And as we go into talking about homesteading and the economy and just, we're going to get into all kinds of things. I felt like you were the best person to do that. So we've had a couple of pastors on here before, just kind of touching a little bit, but you have a really unique situation that you're in being in the middle of New York City. And so to give you guys some background, I want to tell you just really quickly how Mike and I connected, because I know some of you are going to be like, how did this even happen? Because some of you probably follow him online just from me posting about him. And so back in 2023, my husband and I, it was New Year's Eve, we were talking about having a tent revival service. And I had actually texted some worship leader friends of mine. I was like, maybe we should do this year. And it never really came to fruition the beginning of the year. We just weren't feeling a huge push, but we were ruminating on it. And then that same night, a couple hours later, this podcast episode comes up. I think it was the Demon Slayers podcast, and that Mike is part of. And so, everyone's on there talking, and my husband's like, yo, you should get, this guy or that guy on there. And very softly, I heard the Holy Spirit say to me, it's going to be Mike. And I'm like, what? This dude's not even talking yet. I haven't even heard him. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to see how this goes. So we started watching Mike's sermons online. And I remember so clearly, I was standing in the kitchen one Sunday after church. So we would go to church and then we would come home and watch Mike's sermon from that day. And he starts talking about, it was your fast food series where you start talking about how people go and they eat chicken nuggets, but they don't actually raise the broiler chickens and kill them and all this stuff. And my husband turns around, he looks at me, and I was like, is this dude talking about raising broiler chickens and butchering them? And he goes, yeah. He's like, I know what that means. And so anyhow, I started checking out V1 Church and Mike, and I always kind of thought I think there's something more here. And so we connected on Instagram, and Mike starts telling me kind of how he ended up in New York City and how he felt like he was being called to be a Joseph in the middle of New York City. And so I want to kind of start there. Actually, the tent revival did end up happening. Some friends of ours decided to do it, and Mike did come to that tent service that August. So it did end up happening. But Mike, I thought you might start there, like kind of talk about how you ended up in New York City and what your vision was of why you're there.
Yeah, it's funny to think about how many homesteaders are listening right now, and there's a big aspect of preparedness, and so I think the great irony is that I'm from Northwest Indiana originally. I had acreage, like I'd mentioned, my mom's side of the family is from West Virginia. And so for me to be in New York City, I mean, it really is a kamikaze mission for the Lord, because there is there's such a limited amount of preparation I can even do in this environment. I'm way better off than most. And, as with anyone who's prepared, I'm not even going to reveal all of it, but suffice it to say that I've given my family the best head start possible if anything does go down here. But at the same time, I just had to divinely and sovereignly obey his voice. And so for me, I've been entrepreneurial. I had multiple businesses in my 20s and 30s. But when Hurricane Sandy happened, I just got an impression in my heart. Charismatic Christians would say I heard the voice of the Lord, obviously not audibly, but just a very strong impression that I was supposed to go to New York City and really to serve those that had been affected by Sandy. And so I brought a chainsaw, a ration of gas, and a Bible and an acoustic guitar and showed up to New York City. And when I got here, I noticed that people didn't necessarily have physical needs as much as they had spiritual needs. Mm-hmm. And I told my wife, I was just like, Julie, I know this sounds crazy, but I felt like I just returned after a long vacation back home. And I feel like this is going to be home for us. And we're supposed to just be a voice crying in the wilderness. And so, I think the real shocking part of the testimony is that my wife agreed to this, because she's just a simple person. We're not big city people in that regard. So we moved out here and we established the church, and we've just been leading lost people, preaching the gospel in the midst of it. And so that's kind of, we hit fastest growing church in America category for the last 5 years in a row. We never thought we would have a big church. That was never our goal. We just wanted to preach an unapologetic gospel in New York City. But who would have thought it works? People who are desperate, getting delivered of demons, here in New York City, there's tons of witchcraft. And, people getting supernaturally healed, which again, as somebody who comes more from a scientific background, we're really big into medical verification. So we've encouraged people like, make sure that this is sustainable, make sure this is real, not just placebo. And God really has healed people, and we've documented that. And so here in New York City, we've seen all of that happen, and it became like a national movement, so to speak. I went viral because eventually, and it's funny because I'm not even on the same page as him politically, but the New York City mayor ended up finding me through TikTok. And so it's like, fast forward, I'm doing an event in Times Square, massive. I mean, thousands of people showed up, and it went viral globally. And so it's just been, to me, what's funny is people don't know that when we first moved here, our car literally died in Times Square. And so if you would have told us that less than a decade later, in that same place where our car died when we got here, that thousands of people would be gathering to hear the gospel, I just wouldn't even have believed you. So the whole thing's been overwhelming.
Yeah, that is overwhelming. So, you've talked a lot recently about preparedness on your channel, for those of you that do or don't watch. And we have really enjoyed hearing that aspect from you as a pastor. And so one of the questions I have for you is, being the pastor of a church, how do you prepare your congregation for what you see coming ahead, whether it's physically or spiritually? I know that's a loaded question, but I know we also have a lot of people in ministry that are part of the homesteading community that watch and listen to this podcast. So what are you doing, or any suggestions on how to help their members prepare?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very passionate about this topic because, well, let me back up and say, I don't regard myself as a prophet, but if you search me online, you'll see, Charisma magazine featuring prophetic words I release, Elijah List, various different internationally syndicated publications, because I do believe that God speaks to people today. Now, of course, there's so many charlatans and there's so many people out there that are grifting and doing it for financial gain, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't the real thing either. And so I don't regard myself as a prophet. I am friends with people who I legitimately believe are, but I'll be in a time of intense prayer, and the Lord does speak to me. And what gave me a measure of credibility is that, especially during the early 2020s, I started releasing these prophetic words that then would come to pass. And it kept happening over and over and over again, that like these publications started taking note, and they were like, oh, wow, who is this guy, basically? Now, that's a whole nother conversation. But I say that to say, when you look at Matthew chapter 24, Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God will be like 10 virgins. There will be 5 wise and 5 unwise. And really what made the distinction between wise and unwise was who had more oil in their lamp. Because the story that Jesus was telling is that the brides were going to meet the bridegroom, but they had to travel through the night. And so as the sun set and it got darker, they had these lamps. So every virgin had a lamp, but it was only the virgins that had more oil to make it through the night, so that it would light their path. And so what he was saying was that, and the number 10 in Hebrew is minyan. And so they would have heard this as a congregation, the Hebrew, like the Jewish listeners. And so what he was saying was like, hey, there's going to be like 10 people who all call themselves Christians. They're all a part of the church, but 5 are going to be wise and 5 unwise. And the only difference, they all have lamps, they all have lamp stands, they all have oil, but the wise have more oil. And so that is Jesus literally saying, who's prepared for this dark night? And I'm, again, I don't want to be fear-based. I'll talk about that in a second, but I do believe it is going to get darker. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Now, just to substantiate that, I've had the privilege of traveling to multiple countries with John Maxwell. He's the best-selling author on leadership of all time. And as a result of being with him, I've been literally with presidents, dignitaries, I mean, governors, mayors all over the world. I also have a movie that was in over 2,000 theaters in the United States called Domino Revival. It's going to digital distribution this December, but it also premiered in Singapore. So I was able to travel to East Asia, where I was working in and around these governmental structures there. And so I have a pretty robust knowledge for, like in things that I can't even say in the context of this podcast, as a result of like a global perspective, working with major leaders. And so, and again, even here in New York City, I've been brought into a faith community where there's the New York City mayor's office is working, and I just have a lot of data. And so there's the convergence of the prophetic. So there's what God is showing me, and then there's also what I'm hearing and seeing behind closed doors from government officials of multiple nations, and I've been allowed the privilege to be in those rooms. And there, again, there's a lot I can't say, but what I will say is you start to triangulate all this information, and it becomes very clear that things are not going to get better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, so what do I do with all this information? Because I lead thousands of people across all of these locations of V1 Church. But then also, I have 500,000 YouTube subscribers. I have almost 1 million Instagram followers. And these people are looking to me saying, hey, as a pastor, as a man of God, as somebody that tries to be fair and balanced and intellectual, but also faith-filled, what do you see? I take that very seriously. I mean, some days I'm literally sick to my stomach thinking about the fact that many people trust me because the fear of God is on my life. Like, I don't want to get this wrong. On one hand, I don't want to create panic and hysteria, but on the other hand, I don't want to create comfortability.
Right.
So I would just say, to like directly answer your question, preparedness is a biblical value. Jesus in Matthew chapter 25 is saying, if you want to be wise, have more oil. What does that mean? Be prepared to make it through a very dark night. Then you look at Joseph. It's like he's leading in the midst of a famine. I mean, and this is God's man. He's in a political arena in Egypt, and God set somebody up to basically create a Goshen and to say, hey, it wasn't God saying, we're going to exempt you from famine. It's, I'm going to raise up people like Joseph that have wisdom to make it through that situation and distribute seed when everybody else is dying of starvation. But you see the same thing with Noah. It's like, hey, there's a preparedness. You're going to build an ark while everybody is sinning and they're living however they want. And they're going to call you stupid. They're going to call you an idiot. They're going to say that nothing's going to ever happen. But you're the one that sees it. Or you look at Elijah, he says, he's a renowned prophet. And he says, I see a cloud the size of a fist. You don't think that that's torrential downpour, but I see the sign. And I think that, there's always going to be people like the Josephs, the Elijahs, the Noahs, and even to be like Jesus is to say, I see it. It's to you, it's a cloud the size of a fist, but to me, I see coming rain, and I'm going to be ready. And I just think that's part of who we should be. So here I am in New York City, saying these kinds of things but I think that's just like Joseph, he's in Egypt. Moses is in Egypt, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are in Babylon. So it's like over and over and over again. Even Jesus, I mean, there's a census for the firstborn. They're going to kill him. He leaves. It's like you always see God setting people up in the worst environments to be these voices crying out. And I even think what I love about your podcast is, you have gathered all of those people in one place to say, yeah, we see it. And I even think whether they're a Christian or not, they may be operating in a prophetic dimension, and there's a calling on their life. And probably they're like, well, I don't even know how I feel about church or Christianity or religion, but there's something when this guy's talking that's activating in me. And, the Bible says deep calls to deep.
That's right.
The Bible also says that your belly flows with rivers of living water when you're a believer. And so there's a flow that you get into, and, things start making sense and they start clicking in. And I just feel like for me, I'm more like a John the Baptist, like a voice crying in the wilderness, or more like a Noah, Like my wife homeschools, and to homeschool in New York City is very controversial.
Yeah.
I mean, the school systems out here are predatory. The libraries are predatory. So like we really are that family that's like building our ark in the midst of all of this sin and all this craziness out here. And people are just like, what is this family doing? They think we've lost our minds. And I'm like, we have, for the sake
Yeah.
of Christ, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing. And you said ark, building your ark. We Joel Salatin is a farmer we have on here a lot, and that's one of the things he says all the time. The homesteading movement, and even just homeschooling your kids is like building the ark. He's like, get in the ark.
Come
We're building
on.
this. Get in the ark. And that's something that we have to share with people all the time. I'm going to go back a little bit to where you said that there are even people listening to this that may not even claim to be Christian that feel this, deep calling unto deep. And that's one of the reasons that we started. So when I started HOA, it was literally just for homesteading. I had this, this heart to homestead. I grew up in farming. My husband thought I was crazy. And so I didn't have, any support necessarily to homestead. And so a friend of mine said, well, why don't you start a homestead event? And so that's what I did. And it blew up overnight. It was a God thing. It wasn't an Amy thing. That's for sure. And so when 2020 hit, that kind of, we started noticing things like this is different. This isn't just about homesteading. And we saw tens of thousands of people come into the homesteading community. And shortly after that, we met a whole new group of people that really started ministering to our heart about the homesteading movement and what really was behind that. And we always had this inkling that there was more. We were just obedient and taking those next steps. And so what we've been seeing now is, a lot of people know this story. I won't share it here because that could take an hour in itself. But we started hosting these revival services on Friday night of the event. And Parker Green came last year and did that service. And it was just raw and real. And we saw, hundreds of people that came. And I was surprised by how many came that weren't actually even believers and got saved. And mostly because they did feel that deep calling into deep. And so HOA, you guys know this, is more than just about homesteading. We see a greater purpose in this for the kingdom. And there is a greater purpose. If you feel that call to homesteading, we call our farm Refuge of Liberty for a reason. And we believe that homesteads, whether it's in New York City, even if you don't grow tomatoes in your, little tiny patch of grass, you still have that prepper mindset. You still have that homesteading mindset, and the heart behind it, which is really the heart of Jesus behind all of this in preparation. And so it's exciting for us to bring people like you on and other people who aren't necessarily, the average homesteader, because we know there are people who are doing these same things and feeling these same things. And now they're like, okay, I'm not crazy. There actually is a reason behind this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So next question. So in New York City, I know somebody's going to ask this, are there things that you can buy locally to, have that prepper mindset to prepare? Or are you going outside of New York City to find these things? Or are you just doing it online? We have a lot of people in New York. We actually have a lot of people asking us to have an event in New York. And they're all, kind of like, where do I go? Do you know of anywhere around you or in, the greater New York area that is very homestead minded?
Oh, that's such a great question. Yeah, there's this term called new monastics, which is like the concept behind it is like the new monasteries, like the new monks, because the whole idea of monks was like being self-sufficient. And so you do see like urban monastics, urban monks. So there are actually quite a few places in New York City where people have these like rooftop gardens. They have all kinds of like sustainable features. There's a whole underground here and a food distribution. Actually, I think one of the coolest things, I send a lot of our congregants to these food distribution sites in the city, and I love, it's called Food Not Bombs. But basically, I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but Food Not Bombs, what they do is they take like organic food from, whether that's like Whole Foods or just different grocers like here in New York City, that there's nothing wrong with it, but it like the expiration date's like rapidly approaching, and they just gather it. They have a whole system across New York City and Long Island. They gather it and then redistribute it.
Wow.
What's crazy is that the medical community here, like nurses and even doctors, you almost exclusively, I'm saying this in air quotes, grocery shop from Food Not Bombs lines, because it's like, and so it's like this kind of underground thing. Like if I don't even know if the website, but what's cool is that you'll have somebody from like the upper echelon of society right next to somebody who's barely making it, like a homeless person, and they're just shopping. But it's really what it is. It's just a redistribution of food that There's nothing wrong with it. It was just going to get thrown away because of like how we do food in America, And so again, it's not the same as farming or growing it yourself, but it is somebody's like urban solution to redistribution.
Yeah.
Like our family, once a month, we distribute food in Brooklyn to hundreds and hundreds of families, and that's just something that we do. So I would say like Food Not Bombs is a great resource, and that's kind of like outside of the grocer system. And then as far as like prepping goes, I mean, a lot of it is just individuals, and kind of making a plan. I think what's tough is, we're literally on an island. The other day, so for me, I live in Queens. So there's Queens, Brooklyn, and Long Island. That's all on one island. And so there's basically a tunnel and bridge. That's your only options to get out of here, or waterway if you have like a boat. But what's kind of weird is that when you go to take the tunnel, there is a massive, it's like, imagine a bank vault door, and that thing closes and seals in the event that anything happens. And it has happened. And so just that thought, obviously this place will go into total chaos. And that's why I said, I think there's always going to be a convergence between assignment, like what is God's assignment? What has he called you to do? Because the safest place to be on the planet is in the perfect will of God. That's the best way I can explain it, because if I was purely thinking from a natural perspective, like I own another home in Northwest Indiana. That home is completely off the grid. It has a well, everything. It's good to go. But then I have to get to that home.
Right.
And I don't live there permanently, So it's like the New York City thing for me is my way of saying, you know what, God, you called me to be here. And I've got 2 precious daughters. But it's just like, I have to believe that the safest place to be is in your perfect will, because you've called me, to do this. So of course there's Food Not Bombs, and there's these different things, and we have it. And then also I should add, there is a lot of like organic grocers and things like that. There's city structures, that are like informal relational things that people have done, which I think there's a power in community, like finding your people. And maybe if you did an event here in New York City, that'd be a good jump off to bring everybody together to say, okay, because there's a lot of informal. But then also, I guess, just to like round out that answer, it's really gonna, like, if it was purely natural, I would just only live on my Indiana property, and that would be it. But I also, as a man of faith, have to say, God, where have you called me to be? Now, it would be great if something did go down and I just so happen to be in Indiana.
You never know. That might be exactly how it works.
Yeah, exactly. So I wrestle with these things, and I think everybody does, and that's why I always say, like, the Bible says perfect love casts out all fear. The Bible says that God's not given us the spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. So it's like, but there's a fine line between fear and confidence. And you want to be confident to say, okay, God, what am I confident in? Right. I am confident in my preparation, but I also know that that's limited. And so that distance between what I can do and what you can do is faith. And I just believe that you're going to cover the rest divinely. Yeah. And that's how I sleep at night up in New York City.
Yeah. My husband asked me a lot about, traveling. And so he's really funny because he does not like to travel. Actually, I guess neither one of us really like to travel. We're just not those kind of people. And so the Lord has gotten us out of our comfort zone with HOA because we have traveled to various different states to do events. And so the other day, he was saying something and he's like, I don't know how people like, Mike Signorelli and all of these people travel all the time. And I said, because that's what they're called to do. Like if we don't feel like that's our calling, like if we don't feel like that's what we're supposed to be doing, then we shouldn't be doing it. I was going to tell you this in the beginning, but this reminded me. He came home the other day and he said, I learned a new word. I learned a new name for God. I was like, you did? He goes, yeah, Jehovah Sassy. And I'm like, no, that's a Mike Signorelli name. I mean, he was joking. He wasn't serious, but I'm like, oh my goodness. But
well, the guy, I always tell people, like, if people are like, well, I don't know how I feel about Christ. I'm like, well, you met the wrong one. Because if you meet the real Christ, I mean, through the Holy Spirit, like, it is riveting, let me tell you. And I jokingly call God Jehovah Sassy because, I mean, God has a personality. And I'll tell you, and people are like, oh, I don't know if God still speaks. Yeah, just stop talking and listen. And you'll get some answers that are going to blow you away.
Yeah. This is something I always tell everyone. If you think God is boring, you're doing it wrong. I mean, because it's just, there's just no way you can be in the perfect will of God and constantly reading the word and talking to him and praying, fasting and think he's boring. There's nothing boring about a relationship with him. And so I'm going to go back just a little bit to talking about being self-sustainable. One thing that we talk to people about a lot is being community minded, which you are. You have this once a month food distribution and various things. And so it gives me kind of a segue into talking about community sufficiency and how we can encourage others in our sphere, even if they're not homesteading, to take on that mindset of community. So what I have, I can share with you. It's not just all for me. Nowhere in the Bible are we just hoarding everything and then never sharing it, right? And so, we try to teach people all the time, you have to be community minded. If you can't grow everything, have your friend next door grow something. Or, if you don't have access to wheat, somebody else will have access to wheat. And so it's really important to network during these times that we're in, whether you're rural and we're doing this a lot right now in rural America, even, or in the city. There are definitely farms and distribution places that will come into cities and do drops of organic food and, homegrown meat and even milk. I'm sure raw milk is probably illegal in New York, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, everything's illegal out here.
Yeah. So there's some challenges with that, I'm sure, if you want to get direct access to farm food. But we do have a lot of information like that on our website. If you guys are in an area like Mike where you want to kind of network and grow, or just reach out to us and let us know, and we can connect you. Mike, I will not keep you too much longer. I mean, I could keep you for forever, but I'm trying to I know you have, other stuff to do today. But, I wonder if you will kind of tell us, you did, I think you guys just launched a course where you were talking about ministry and social media.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of have you plug that real quick. Talk a bit about that. What do you do? What do you offer online, not just in person?
Yeah, that's actually, well, let me just say this. I love the idea of building strong tribes, strong communities, because there's wisdom to have other people hedge against your own weakness. So we all have unique skills, unique giftings from God. And then when we combine them together, that really is a layer of preparation that people don't talk about. It's like, so you could think, well, I've got it, food, shelter, water, but it's like, yeah, but you're missing the communal aspect. And that actually in many ways is the most important. And so that's a huge part of, and admittedly, I'm an introvert. So this is not my default mode. I don't want people listening think, oh, that's easier for you because you like people. Get out of here. I have been,
we're mutual in that.
Yeah, I'm an introvert, and also I went through a lot of stuff in my past, a lot of tragedies. And so, my default mode is to distrust, but that's not the wisest thing for your survival. And God, wants to rewire your brain. And so anyways, yeah, I would say that, excuse me, I had a major breakthrough in 2020 because I hate the internet. In so many ways, I think the internet's toxic. I can prove, and it's so funny because just yesterday this actually came out. It was very vindicating when Zuckerberg said, like, yes, we allowed the U.S. government to cause us to bias
Right.
political against certain political persuasions. Because I mean, well, let me back up. So I started going live during the pandemic from New York City reluctantly. My wife was the one who was like, Mike, you need to go live. We have this multi-site church. We don't own our venues in New York City. So we were at the mercy of the people that own them. So we couldn't meet. And I started getting super discouraged. And Julie's like, I know that you're not really into the internet, but it's kind of like your only option.
Right.
So at that point, it was illegal in New York City to walk the streets, which to me was absurd. So my act of defiance was that I would have my clergy card in my pocket and I would grab my phone and I would literally walk around New York City doing these live streams. And if I got stopped by cops, would say, I'm clergy. And they would thankfully let me go because they were giving tickets to people just for walking the streets during lockdown, which to me was like, Orwellian. That was like, this is crazy. Like, I can't believe we live in this world. And then, many of you guys remember, ironically, it evolved into you can't eat at the restaurants, but you can eat in these smaller huts that are fully enclosed outside with no ventilation.
No sense
So it was
whatsoever.
like the dumbest thing imaginable. So what happened was I would be going live to thousands of people concurrent, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 people on these live streams from my phone. And, just ministering to them every day. And I called it my Mr. Rogers era because I don't feel like I was doing anything like that special. It's not like I was preparing these sermons, but I was just being present in people's lives every single day as a form of comfort to them, to be like, let's pray together, let's journey together in the faith. And then it became very apparent that I sort of was like the how do I put it? I always say like the Kurt Cobain of social media, where like he didn't want to be a famous musician, but the 80s hair metal bands were really big and they wore spandex and like they shaved against the grain and they wore makeup and they had huge, teased out hair. And then when Kurt Cobain showed up, he was like the opposite of all of that. And, the grunge era, he looked like a blue collar worker. He didn't care what people thought about him. And everybody was like, ooh, we love this. This is anti rock star, which ironically made him a rock star. So for me, I'm in New York City, sort of being like the anti celebrity pastor. Like I'm in New York City, I'm walking the streets, I'm just ministering into my phone, blah, blah, blah. And I think that the best explanation I have of how I blew up online was that people were like, oh, this is refreshing because this guy isn't like all the other celebrity pastors. Yeah. And then the irony is it made me a celebrity pastor. So that's what I think is hilarious, because my social media started blowing up. And this is before you could pay for that blue check mark on Facebook and Instagram. And I ended up getting, because I was on the news all the time too. That's a whole nother story, but I kept making the news over and over again. So I ended up getting blue check mark verified. And everybody's like reaching out to me, teach me how to do it, teach me how to grow online. And I was like, and I would give them these Yoda answers, I'd be like, oh, you want to, pray more, give more to the poor, serve the poor and the needy. This is how you grow on the internet. And they'd be like, no, for real, how do you grow? I'm like, I'm telling you, this is what I do, preach the gospel to those on the streets. But then over the years, I've had to be like, okay, I have to ask God, I think I'm supposed to do this because there's so much grace on it. Yeah. And so recently, finally, had so many people ask me, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to really sit down and think about this. How do, because now, even though I hate the internet, I don't think it's necessarily a realistic option to just shut it off.
Right.
So it's like, if you can't reject it, you have to redeem it. So that's really what it came down to. Like, if I'm not going to reject social media, I'm going to try to redeem it. And so I put together this Creator Academy with the guy that has been working with me. His name's Evan. And man, what's really crazy is we have people that are now making like part-time and full-time incomes already. And we just debuted this thing, so I think that can also be a massive tool for somebody, the Creator Academy, it's really like we made all these modules. We have all these things, but we also have a community. So people are like organically engaging with each other's content, liking it, sharing it, commenting it. They're growing together, and it's just been super healthy. But what's more important than all that is the messages these people are getting out to the world and doing it and going viral and growing their pages and growing incomes. Like, it's, to me, it's been like, oh, wow, okay, I can get down for that, you know?
Right.
So that's a real quick explanation of like what happened to me online. But then also now I'm a dad at the end of the day. I'm a dad. So I kind of look at it as like, it's not about me, but sometimes I have to go first. So that's how
Right.
I look at the internet. Like, okay, I figured it out, you know, even with my YouTube. So I have 500,000 subscribers from long format, which is like unheard of. That's very hard to do because a lot of people go viral in short form content, but I'll go live and just talk for 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes. And, you know, those streams get millions of views, but the
Yeah.
messages of them, the world desperately needs to hear. So it's not, for me, it's not about being famous, but it is about saying like, hey, we live in this modern era where everybody's trying to condition people to think that the new ideas are the best ideas.
Right.
And what I'm saying is like the new ideas are not the best ideas.
Mm-hmm.
We're already seeing the implications of these new ideas, and it's destroying our society. I actually believe I'm called to be a keeper of ancient paths. So I'm basically saying like, hey, I'm a keeper of these ancient paths, the wisdom of the ancients. And that's what's going viral. So the Creator Academy is me helping a lot of people do that. We do it on school. So if you go to SKOOL, it's school, SKOOL.com, and just type in the Breakers Creator Academy, you'll see it. And about 300 people are in it now. And my hope is that more people join.
Wow. Yeah. And we'll link that below too for you guys. That way you can just easily click it and find it for anyone who's interested. I know a hot topic of conversation is, how do you create income online? So one of the things we talk a lot about is taking advantage of the internet. Just like you said, if it has to be used to some degree. So how do we use it? How do we make an income off of it? How can it support
Yeah.
your ministry? How can it support your farm? How can it support your family? And we are seeing a ton of ministries rise up out of the homesteading community because of starting with homesteading and then now moving into ministry. I mean, we have people who have entire farms who are straight up just YouTube all the time, and that's how they support their family and their farm. And others have, actual ministries on their farm, whether it's for trauma or whether it's a retreat for pastors and their wives, or we have some who are actually in the healthcare industry. So we've seen a lot of people in homesteading who were in the healthcare industry after COVID.
Wow.
And they came out of that industry and decided to start their own healthcare system, essentially, is what it is, on their farms. And so, part of that is they get the freedom to minister to people, not just see them physically, but also minister to them spiritually.
Wow.
And, one of the things that we tell people, and you guys that are coming to conference will learn more about this, the Friday evening of the revival service that we're doing. But one of the things we expect to see, there are hard times coming. There are things that are happening even now that are just crazy, right? Like, who thought the president of the United States would be incapable of taking care of the country? Things like that
Right.
you never thought you'd see. But what we expect is that as these things happen more and more, we will see more and more the glory of God. We will see, farms and churches and various places that have people just flooding to them and saying, I need to know Jesus. I need to know who who's the Savior of the world. And so it's really interesting to see a lot of things starting to amp up in these communities together. I really feel like, the Christian community and the homesteading community are really finally coming together, because we did a study one time, I guess it was 2 years ago, where it's not, this wasn't this way in the beginning, but it's now 95% of our listeners and 95% of the people who attend conference are of some denomination of Christianity.
Wow.
And that speaks volumes to me that
Yeah.
there's not just farming happening, there's a whole lot of ministry happening on these farms and on these homesteads. And so, hearing that there's that option too to make an income, I just wanted to plug that so people know, because a lot of farmers start farming and they're not making a whole lot of money, but they could be doing it in another way. So we really appreciate you sharing that with our community.
Yeah. And let me just say briefly, here's the thing. I have this line that I always use for it. The wrong people are on the internet. That's the
Right.
problem. The wrong people are on the internet. Like the people who really know what they're doing don't film it. They just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem. So for me, that's what happened was like, I'm a real pastor. I'm a real shepherd. I marry people. I bury people. I counsel people. So I was just doing the work. That's why I hated the internet, because I thought to myself, like, I'm just actually doing it in real life. Why would I go online and talk about doing it? But then what happened was when I started sharing, people are like, oh, this guy is the real deal. Like I can tell he actually knows what he's talking about. And I always use this phrase, the cream rises,
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just encourage you, if you're listening right now and haven't thought about it. The other thing too, is most of my videos that went viral early on were totally blurry. So this
Mm-hmm.
idea of like, it has to be the highest quality is it's the content. It's the visual you can always get better at. But for me, and that's what we're trying to teach in the Creator Academy, but it's like the substance. I did a video, 10 cursed items that you should remove from your home. And that the quality of that video is not necessarily high, but it's got millions of views because people did it and they were like, whoa, the whole atmosphere of my home shifted,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know. Or I did another video, why God removes people. That video is actually blurry. And I remember being mad at one of my team members, like, why didn't you come and help me set it up? But the content that's in it was so beneficial. People are sharing it all around the world.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and that got millions of views, which, as you know, equates to finances. So I'm passionate about this for two reasons. One, I want the right people to be on the internet, like
Mm-hmm.
people who really know what they're doing and how to do it. But then number two, I agree with you on like sources of income, which I think is really, really important, because it also enables you to be with your family, make your own schedule. Like sometimes my daughters are like, Dad, I miss you. And my wife starts laughing because she's like, let me help you understand. You see your dad more than every other kid in New
Right.
York City because of the way he set our life up, So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm looking forward to seeing who signs up for Creator Academy. And, I think it'll help.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. One of our biggest things is bringing it all back home, right? Homesteading, homemaking, bringing your finances in from the home, and not working for a ton of people, and you're only making a small amount of that income, right? You're just making more people money. So we did a business event back in the spring, and that was really popular. And these are the people who don't want to be online, and they need to be, just like you said. So I'm going to encourage you guys to go check that out. Okay, I am going to ask you another question, and it's totally flipping, what we've been talking about. So recently you've posted a few videos. I mean, we're really flipping it like right now. So
Yeah,
you've
I'm
posted a
here
few
for it.
videos about witchcraft. And this is something we see a ton of in the natural world and homesteading. And so,
Hmm.
one of the things that this is more so for like me, my side of it, because I'm an herbalist. And one of the things I see all the time in herbalism is this mesh between the occult and natural living. And so this is one thing we constantly have to battle in the homesteading community, because a lot of people don't understand. I have so many people that say, well, I'm a witch and a Christian. And I'm like, that's not even possible at all. And so I wonder if you might talk just a little bit about that. And we'll also plug the recent videos you've done. You've done some interviews recently on that, so people can kind of see that. But I thought you might give a general gist of it to really encourage people to look into that more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the recent interview, it just crossed 1 million views on YouTube. I actually sat down with two witches, and one was doing blood rituals, and she explains that in detail. And then the other one was more, I guess, what you would consider the New Age. And so they tell their stories, and I'd love for everybody to really hear them explain, because now they are Christians. But really, for me, from a pastor's perspective, so the first thing, and I'm also known, for those of you who don't know me, globally as a demon slayer. And, that title is hilarious. It really, what happened was, I've been doing the work of deliverance and casting demons out of people since the late 90s. Some of you may have heard the term exorcism if you come from Catholicism, or just see it in Hollywood. But there is a real version of that where people are demonized. They do need deliverance. They do need demons cast out of them. And of course, not everything's a demon. We don't want to sensationalize this, but there are many people who are struggling, and that's the prescription Christ would have gave. When you read the scriptures, almost 1/3 of every account of Jesus' ministry to people was him casting demons out of people. And yet in most of our churches in America, you can attend for decades and never see that happen. But they tell you, be like Jesus. You're like, okay, so when are we going to cast demons out? And so for me, I ended up in the pandemic streaming with 3 other guys that were known for deliverance. And then we dubbed ourselves the Demon Slayers, literally as a joke. We just thought we were just being goofy. And then the internet latched onto it and was like, the Demon Slayer. And it became a whole thing. But I say that to say, what you learn in deliverance is that Satan is a master deceiver, meaning he always shows up as an angel of light. So he doesn't show up to your front door with a pitchfork and horns and say, hey, I'm the devil, let me wreck your life. It always shows up as a form of good that's disconnected from God. And it's
Right.
false good. That's the best way to explain. And that's the most difficult thing to explain to somebody who is involved in witchcraft is I have met evil witches, people they're going, because there is a whole realm of that that's connected to the demonic. And there are people that just, that's a whole nother podcast we can do together.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the people I've encountered are people who believe that they're doing something good. And this is why I brought up deliverance, as soon as you start exposing it, immediately everything shifts. It's like people will, for example, back in the day, I don't do this anymore, but I used to do house visits. And this woman kept saying, I have the ghost of a little girl in my house. And I said, okay, let me show up and I'll investigate. And I would bring GoPros and I would bring another person with me just to for accountability, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that nobody could say something happened that didn't happen. And I'm going through this woman's house, just taking inventory. What's in her house? What is she involved in? What's she doing? And of course, there was a lot of new age occult type practices intermingling with Catholicism. So she had statues of saints, Virgin Mary statues of angels. And then she had these other new age occult stuff, horoscopes, sage, that kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. So we sat down and she's sitting in her chair and I said, okay, I've got good news and bad news. And she was like, well, what is it? And I said, well, the bad news is it's not the ghost of a little girl. The Bible is very clear to be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord. Also, Jesus talked about heaven and hell, a lot. And so there is no middle ground here. It's when you die, that's final. It's heaven or hell. And I said, that's the bad news. And I said, and I also need to help you understand that this is actually a malevolent spirit. This is a demon that's parading around as a little girl. And I didn't even get to tell this woman what the good news was going to be. I'm here and we're going to deal with it. And as soon as I started even talking like this woman started manifesting this demon. And I said, as I was saying the phrase, that it's not around you, it's in you. And while I'm saying that, this woman starts flailing around violently. She's convulsing. And of course, I cast the demon out of her. And I got chills all over me just telling this story. She got totally delivered, but it was weird because it was like somebody turned an additional set of lights on in the house. The whole house felt like it got brighter.
Wow.
It got lighter. And then I had to take her through a process of throwing all that stuff out. That's just one quick story, though, of but the thing is, it's like, so a demon knows it's if I can present myself as the ghost of a little girl, I can remain. And then if I can go a step further and make this woman think that I'm outside of her, not inside of her, then she's going to do
Yeah.
all these things to just try to deal with her environment, but not deal with herself. So there's so many layers of deception. And that's why I truly believe we need the Holy Spirit to reveal these things to us, and the scales have to fall off of our eyes, because it's like the deeper somebody goes into witchcraft, there's so many layers of deception that, and usually the stories are all the same. I'm going to save you guys if you don't watch the video. They're all the same. You go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's like the devil makes promises he can't fulfill. And you have to do this to solve this, to solve this, to solve this. And the deeper you go in, one day you will wake up being like, my life's actually worse. Physically, mentally, emotionally, I'm doing worse. And all of these people who've come out of witchcraft, the occult, the new age, they all have the same story. It was this pursuit of making things better. But then as they went deeper, and I think what you and others are trying to save people from is, why go all the way down that journey?
Right.
Why have to arrive to that conclusion? I'm trying to save you, from going there. And just like that story with the woman, she's buying statues. She's doing everything she can to help this situation, thinking it's in her home. But really what she was doing was actually feeding this demon. And because they thrive off of that stuff, the idolatry, the statues, it's feeding them. And so,
Right.
real quick, but you can tell I'm super passionate about this. And by the way, we do mass deliverances across all of my campuses, and we do that a couple times a year. And there will be piles and piles of drugs, paraphernalia, all this stuff, and we just destroy it all. And and people just, it's insane. But the other thing I was going to say is, there was a woman that I was doing a Zoom deliverance on last year, and she was in another country. And I told her, I said, man, by the Spirit, I said, I just feel like you're not getting free, because these demons are anchoring to something. There's like an emotional component, but and I said, I'm going to take a risk here, but I feel like on the other side of the camera, your whole room, and maybe this is just spiritual, but it's filled with objects that they're just drawing power from, because there's these emotional connections to them, and which are soul ties. And I kid you not, she starts saying, "Oh, you're scaring me right now. You're scaring." I'm like, "Why?" She takes the camera, she spins it around her, and it was a literal vision I was having. Her entire apartment was filled, and what she said was, every country I visited, I would buy all these objects from the natives, from the locals. And it's all connected. And I was like, listen, you're going to have to destroy all of this stuff. But it's also to help her understand it's not about the object in and of itself. It's about what it symbolizes. And then the spiritual connection we make to it. And, which we don't have time to delve into that as well. But there's and so anyways, she got totally free, and it changed her life. That whole session was life changing. And so I just think right now, you have hashtag witch talk on TikTok.
Right.
It's becoming popular. Cosmo magazine, which Cosmopolitan is primarily for young people. Some of the lead contributors are witches involved in the occult. So guess what the articles they're going to be about are, menstruation, blood rituals, and all this stuff. And the more it becomes normalized, that's really what the devil and all these demons are primarily trying to do, is normalize things that shouldn't be normal.
Right.
And I think for the prepping community, the homesteader community, this should make total sense, because it's like, we've made things normal in the food industry that shouldn't have been normal.
Right.
We've made things like, I go overseas all the time. I'm of Italian descent, and I was in Sicily recently. They like, Italy revolts against additives and things in food. Like, I love being in Italy because my body just starts healing. Like, it's crazy. But my point, even bringing that up, is if you're listening to me right now and you're thinking, I don't know if I believe this guy, it's like you've already accepted the fact that there are things that were normalized in the food industry that shouldn't be normal. Why wouldn't it be the same in in the new age, the occult, all these other practices, and it happens little by little.
Yep.
And there's covens of witches all over America. They show up to our churches and our church locations and to hex us and to curse us and all this stuff. Unfortunately for them, a lot of them end up getting saved and accepting Christ. We just baptized a pretty big witch that converted to Christianity, abandoned all of that. And she would have regularly 1,500 people. She would do Witch Wednesday. And I told her, I said, in front of our whole church, I said, God's going to change it from Witch Wednesday to Warfare Wednesday.
Yeah.
And you're going to raise up an army, and so we have those kinds of stories. But I'm real passionate about this, as you can tell.
Yeah. And it's not just cities either. I have this conversation with a lot of people. Rural America, you would be blown away by the amount of the occult in rural America. I mean, I have sat in a church with a church member who's a warlock. And I mean, and they're okay with having him there. And it's like, why? Why are you okay? This is not okay. And, and so there are different levels of this. And that's all, that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day we could talk about. But but what I see the most, especially in homesteading and herbalism, is a lot of people get into this because they think it's good. Oh, this is good. The herbs are good. The helping people or, tarot cards or whatever you're into are good. And they're not good. They're not good at all. And I love that you made the analogy about the food system and how, you're being lied to in so many other ways. You're also being lied to in this way. And so it shouldn't be a surprise at all. It shouldn't be a surprise at all. So thank you for that analogy, because I think it'll help a lot of people that are listening to this. So, okay, I've kept you for an hour. I know you're busy. I would love to keep you for forever because I could just blow through a ton of questions, but I know you have stuff to do. So I'm going to leave this open. At the end, what I do, and you can take as long as you want to, I always leave it open for our guests to just share their heart and whatever you feel like, God wants you to share with the people listening and watching this podcast. So have at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me just first and foremost, thank you. I adore you and your family, and that spending time with you for that revival event we did. My daughter was with me, my eldest, and we talk about it often. And you guys are so special, and you're helping so many people. And so, I just want to end with an encouragement. And I believe that as the world gets darker, our light shines brighter, and many people are coming out of a season of despair and depression and anxiety and worry, and they're coming into their finest hour. And I truly believe that. This isn't hype. I do believe that, again, Joseph struggled for 17 years. He got lied on, rejected, discarded. But then when he came into second in command over all of Egypt, the Lord promoted him. And then the same people that did him wrong, which was his brothers, end up at his feet, fulfilling the prophetic dream God gave him many years prior. And he looked at him and he said, what you meant for evil, God has surely turned it around for my good. And so I just believe that there are many people listening right now that are getting ready to come into a season of vindication and validation. They've lied about you or lied on you. They've talked about you. They've dismissed you. They didn't understand you, but it doesn't matter because the Bible says promotion comes from the Lord. He brings people down and he raises people up. It doesn't matter if they like you. It doesn't matter if they understand you. He raises you up. That's my story, and I really believe that for everybody listening, there is a season of vindication and validation that is coming. And some of you are already stepping into it. Some of you are getting ready to step into it. But I believe when it happens, you'll hear these words ringing in your ears and you'll be like, Pastor Mike said it. That crazy dude living in New York City said it. And so and that's why for me, it's like when Egypt said we have a famine, that was bad news for everybody else except for Joseph, because God had a plan. It's like when David hears the taunts of Goliath, I always say this, but it's like that was bad news for everybody else. But for David, that was his finest hour. That's how he got promoted. So this is, for me, it's like, we're supposed to be alive for such a time as this. A lot of my heroes in the faith are from the 1920s. Well, I'm in the 2020s. And it's like, it's my turn now. It's like, I'm here for such a time. I'm made for this. You know, one of the things I went viral for in Times Square is I said, this is the end of the seeker sensitive movement. And I said, there's wartime generals and there's peacetime generals. The peacetime generals, their outfits are nice. They got creases in them. They smell like cologne. But the wartime generals, we got blood on our uniforms. We might not look how you think we should look. We might not talk how you want us to talk, but we're battle ready. And I think I'm one of those guys where it's just like, listen, I'm a wartime general. Like, I'm ready. Like, this is why I'm here. This is my destiny. And so I think there's many people listening right now that are recognizing, like, you're alive for such a time as this. And I count it as a great privilege. And as each year goes on and I lose more hair and I get more grays, I think to myself, God, I get it now. I know why I'm here. I know why I was born when I was born. And I think that for many of you, you're going to come into more confidence in your calling and more confidence in who you are. So I just want to leave everybody with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. I love the wartime and peacetime general thing. I didn't hear you say that when I watched that. So that's a lot of what we've been feeling right now too. So it's really awesome to hear you say that.
Come on.
All right, guys. Thank you for joining us this week. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. We appreciate you. We might have to have you on again sometime to get like into more deep conversations. We'll see how the first podcast goes. Right now, we'll blow it away with the second one.
Come on. I'm down for round 2 if they are.
Yeah. Oh, even if they're not, we might still do round 2, right? So I wanted to tell you guys too, there is another tent meeting that is coming up that Mike came to last year that I was talking about. The farm hosts of that they're redoing it again this year. We're not involved this year, but they are doing that again this year. So if you want to check that out, we will try to link that below too if you're local. And also all the show notes that we talked about, any links that we had will be in the description of the video and the podcast. So thanks guys and happy homesteading. Hey, thanks for taking the time to listen to this week's Homesteaders of America episode. We really enjoyed having you here. We welcome questions, and you can find the transcript and all the show notes below or on our Homesteaders of America blog post that we have up for this podcast episode. Don't forget to join us online with a membership or just to read blog posts and find out more information about our events at homesteadersofamerica.com. We also have a YouTube channel, and follow us on all of our social media accounts to find out more about homesteading during this time in American history. All right, have a great day and happy homesteading.